Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Whatever your time zone, welcome. This is Digital Transformation Talk. I am your host, Kevin Crane. Welcome to the show. We are here today to talk about transforming your business critical virtual and hybrid events. This is an important topic because it's a virtual world, as we all know. As a matter of fact, the fact that we're gathered here together today from around the world virtually and online is evidence of that. We're very real evidence of the cultural and business move towards remote work and virtual events and online collaboration. In many ways, we define the COVID-inspired escalation in digital transformation in general. Today, just as remote work has become a prevalent, if not preferred way of working, virtual events have become a norm. Indeed, 90% of large-scale event organizers surveyed recently say that all large-scale events will be hybrid or virtual within the next 2 years. And even with the return of physical events, virtual continues to deliver impact and ROI. Virtual event organizers point to increased event registration, greater ROI, and greater attendee engagement as top benefits of virtual events compared to in-person. This makes sense. Virtual events are pandemic-proof, they're environmentally friendly, cost-effective, and frankly, it's what we've come to expect. We expect virtual events, we expect online meetings and calls, we expect web-based sessions like today's Digital Transformation Talk. But with all of that, people still like to be together in person, especially for big events and conferences. One study found that 63% of marketers are planning to return to in-person events this year. But at the same time, about 60% of those same respondents think that virtual live events will continue to grow. So many event planning pros say that 2023 will shape up to be the year of the hybrid event, events which combine live in-person components with a virtual online component. In fact, 62% of trade shows in 2023 will be hybrid events. So the question for us today is, how can you transform your business critical virtual and hybrid events? What are some best practices to consider and some strategies to leverage virtual and hybrid events, both internal and external to the company? That's what we'll be discussing today with a great panel of guests. But before I introduce our guests, I do want to say that we want to hear from you too. In fact, we'd like to encourage everyone attending today to participate. So please feel free to talk and comment in the chat section. And if you have a question along the way for our guests, please enter them into the Q&A feature. That's where I'll be watching for questions. I will attempt to get some of those questions into the flow of the show, and we'll have a few minutes also at the end for your questions. So with that, let's bring aboard our guests today, starting with Marie Thornton, Head of International Marketing at Blue Jeans by Verizon. Marie, are you with us? Hello, Marie.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Thank you for introducing me. Very much.
There you are.
Today's panel.
It is so great to have you with us, Marie. Where are you calling in from?
So I'm in Bracknell in Berkshire in the UK, and I look after international marketing for Blue Jeans, so everything outside of North America.
Nice, very good. Well, it is so great to have you on board. Thank you so much. Joining Marie is Soraya Hazalik. Soraya is a Customer Activation Manager for Diageo. Soraya, are you with us?
Yes. Hi, Kevin. Very nice to be here.
It is great to have you aboard too. Where are you calling in from, Soraya?
So I'm calling you from Athens, Greece. And basically what we do for Diageo is leading a couple markets within their marketing strategies across continental Europe.
Well, it is great to have you on board as well. Thank you for being with us. Joining us also is Carrie Heath. Carrie is Marketing Director for Europe and China with LexisNexis Risk Solutions. Carrie, are you with us?
I am. Thank you for having me.
Carrie, it's great to have you with us. Sorry I interrupted. Where are you calling from, and tell us a bit more?
Sure. So I'm calling in from Reading in Berkshire in the UK, and I look after the marketing teams and strategy for our Europe and China businesses, which is basically everything outside of North America.
All right, we are worldwide today for sure. And also joining us today is Sophie Cordia. Sophie is Head of Production for IT and Business. Sophie, are you with us?
Hello, yes, I am. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Nice to see you all.
Hello, Sophie. It is great to see you too. Where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from Surrey, which is, I'm just in a small village just outside London.
Nice. Well, oh my goodness, I feel like I'm the only American on this call today, but that is just fine with me. I'm calling in from the west coast of the United States here in Portland, Oregon. So welcome aboard, everyone. Welcome aboard, everyone joining us today. I'd like to start our discussion today by pointing us to an article published recently by Forbes, and DT Hunter will be posting this article in the chat feature now. The article talks about how virtual and hybrid events are more than just a COVID era fix. This makes sense to me. As I mentioned in my intro, it's really a part of the bigger cultural and business trend towards virtual and online collaboration and interaction. So I'll start here with our panel today. Everyone, what are your experiences in conducting virtual events? Can you describe your experience and how you've been holding virtual events for your organization? And Marie, perhaps I can start with you. Tell us a little bit more about your experience and what you've been doing at Blue Jeans.
Yeah, so Kevin, if I can take you back a little bit before Blue Jeans, I've been in marketing and events in marketing for sort of over 2 decades. Right back to sort of doing the RSA Conference Europe, which is this multi-day, multi-billion-dollar budgeted affair, if you like, down to doing, you know, training sessions at hotels up and down the UK like 4 times a month. When the pandemic hit, I worked for a big telco company, and we would do our CIO kind of advisory boards. And it was, you know, you go from having this 1.5 day face-to-face somewhere nice in London or somewhere in the States, and it was, the interaction was there, you know, the networking was there, the presentations were there, and then we had to move everything onto online. So to watch that shift, and I think what happened is, I think most organizations had a plan for UC and how they were going to go and adopt that, but it just, the COVID pandemic just sped that all up. So watching that leap of having to go and move everything online, the novelty factor was there, I think, at first. And I think everyone was happy to join in because they wanted the connection. I think so many people were suddenly cut off from colleagues and family and loved ones that they were all very happy for any online event that came their way. And then it kind of went into apathy as it kind of became, well, this is just how it's going to go. And now we're at the online meeting fatigue stage, where it's just so much of everyday life and the little square boxes every day. How do we make it different? How do we help people engage? So I think for me, what I've noticed, and I'm in a very fortunate situation insofar as I work for Blue Jeans, and this is what we do virtual events platforms, and we play with all the interaction. How do we get the audience to engage? So from that perspective, what I've seen is that obviously the tech does a certain amount. It does the interaction features, it does the great audio, it does the great video. But whether you're doing a face-to-face event or whether you're doing virtual, or whether you're doing hybrid, it all comes back to that. Got to be great topics, got to be great speakers, MC, great quality control on the content. So the run of show, if anything, all that expertise that goes in, I think people think, oh, virtual events are so much easier to put on. They are not. They are just as difficult, just as complicated to do in the background. But if you fail to prepare, prepare to fail. So I think what's nice with events is that you can make it more inclusive. Kevin, to your point, when you the previous company, being able to get people from every single region joining for 2 hours, far easier than getting one location for a day and a half. So I think face-to-face, virtual, and hybrid all have their place. I just think us marketers and our event organisers, we have a much bigger strategy and so many more things to coordinate and try now.
Soraya, what is your experience at Diageo with online and virtual events, and what are some best practices that you folks have been using?
Well, I think at Diageo we have, at least my department has always had we work virtually and remotely, so kind of the communication has always been there to virtual. So I think we got that down. I think kind of you're coming from spirits and beer company where used events being in, you know, physical and having that sort of celebrative aspect, that the kind of, you have to, like Marie mentioned, you have to kind of have the same atmosphere online. So I think some of the best practice we can is that you cannot just have plain events stuff. You have to actually make it more, I don't know if the luxurious is the right word, but kind of make it more advanced. So besides the topics, you have to engage, you have to bring all of that sort of the company stands for, whether that is sort of renting a studio and having sort of a speaker, having an MC, having interesting stories, but you have to find a way to engage more now, because now we're not just transferring information online, we're actually trying to engage or influence online. So, but I think I stand with the fact that one of the best practices, like no matter what event you put on, you have to have a strategy behind it. So kind of define what it is that you want to be the outcome of your event. Whether that's a launch, whether that's just pure information, but whether that's just a simple thing as drive sales, you want to engage people to sell something, but you have to have a plan. It cannot just be pure communication anymore.
Now, Carrie, like Soraya, you are in great geographic locations. Soraya is in all over the place: Spain, Portugal, Greece. As we mentioned, Carrie, you're in Europe and China. That's a great breadth of geographic locations. What's your experience with virtual and online events, especially across the breadth of Europe and China?
I think it really is market dependent on what the market needs, what do the audience need. I mean, China's a great example of a market that's been much slower to return to in-person. They're nearly 12 months behind the kind of our Western counterparts, so to speak. We're literally just going back into in-person events this year, and that's meant that we've had to survive in a virtual only world a lot longer in that region. That's not to say it's better or worse, it's just different. When we've had the UK businesses going back, the French, the German businesses going back into these in-person environments, and while we're still managing both virtual events and in-person, we're pushing ourselves to be more in-person in the Western regions, and we're just about coming back to it in China. But it's been a lot slower, very different needs, different audiences, and it's about adapting for that customer base.
Now, Sophie, you've been waiting patiently. Thank you so much. I know you're head of production for ITN business. You have a great deal of production experience. What's your experience with virtual and online events, and how it's been working for ITN?
It's funny listening to Marie in particular, because my background is actually not in events. So my experience of sort of the events world began at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, when ITN essentially grew a division out of nowhere purely because we had all this amazing broadcast production expertise under the roof, and they're producing news programs, live TV programs every day, all week. And our clients, whether they be businesses or brands, they still wanted to be able to interact with their audiences. They still wanted to be able to speak to all of their colleagues, but just couldn't all get together in the NEC, for example. It just wasn't possible. So I've never actually produced an event like that, an in-person event with tens of thousands of people. My experience is very much initially the online event business, and then as the couple of years have gone by, now the hybrid event business. So I don't have that benchmark to compare it to, which I think is probably good in some ways. And I think for me, what I loved about the article is that a lot of people, you hear a lot of people saying, well, eventually events will just go back to those big in-person, events where everyone gets together and, costs hundreds of thousands of pounds sometimes. Whereas the article I found fascinating because it was so positive towards the hybrid events business and the online events business.
It was.
And for me, it's not now about returning back to that sort of everyone in one room. And it's more about what we've learned and what we can take forward. For example, I think several of us here are probably working from home today. If we were having this conversation 3 years ago, we probably wouldn't have been. So life just has gone on, and some of it is in a positive way. So, the money you're spending on travel, not least because of the sustainability conversation as well. I just think there's so much positivity around these events. And I think as long, as Soraya was saying, as long as you're confident that your event can engage just as well, if not better than an in-person event, then why wouldn't it continue? Why wouldn't there be 20% growth in the business? I think that's what the article said for the next 7 years. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's all really positive.
Interesting, Sophie. You know, the article was positive about virtual and online events. It examines some of the fundamental benefits of online and virtual events. Virtual events are arguably easier to put together, less costly to put on. You have unlimited attendees online. There's often built-in tech and support. It's easy for attendees to engage. Those are all operational benefits. But my question really is, and Sophie, you're hinting at it here, what are some of the performance advantages that are possible for organizations that do it right, really leveraging virtual events as an advantage? And is there a new future for organizations that do this right to have virtual events and online acumen be a competitive advantage? Sophie, do you feel that that is possible for organizations to find a competitive advantage if they do this right?
I think so. And I think it's finding, a production partner or a tech partner who has sort of an innovative point of view and, is wanting to kind of constantly change the mold. And, we have repeat clients we work with on a sort of 6-month, 12-month basis on repeat. And every time we produce an event for them now, we're constantly looking at how we can do it slightly better than the time before, or if not better, what can we do differently so that, you don't get meeting fatigue and you get people logging in thinking, well, I saw all of this 6 months ago. You're just constantly looking at ways to be innovative, whether that's through production techniques, whether that's through locations, hosts, the creative content that you're discussing. I think as long as you can constantly be on the front foot and, push your boundaries a little bit in terms of what you're discussing and how that's shaped. Marie mentioned the run of show. That's, very much like my language, and it's really important to make sure, like editorially or engaging people, they're not just logging on and doing their emails in the background and not really paying attention. They are actually engaging with it, and you have polls, you have Q&A, you have chat functions. So yeah, I think it's just all about making sure the businesses that will succeed and will sort of grow a name for themselves in this market, I think, are those that are constantly just looking at bigger and better ways to produce these events and to keep people coming back for more.
Marie, do you feel that organizations that do virtual right will gain a competitive advantage?
I think it's about having that flexibility, as Sophie touched upon. We're not returning back to how we were before. We're definitely not. It's about being smarter. And I think what I've seen happen is, because that virtual event, it's including people, it's very inclusive and it's accessible. And I was at a marketing leaders lunch a couple of months ago, and what was very interesting was talking around how people's attitudes to event attendance have changed. There used to be, there's some events where you could be all week in a particular country, in a different country, away from your family and friends, whereas people are now very picky and choosy about what they will go to. So this kind of goes back to what Sarah was saying, having that strategy, having that plan. If you do it right, you will get people to come. With the virtual, you then knock down borders in terms of regions that can take part in it. You also, accessibility, I think one of the things that came through COVID is who looks after the childcare, who does the healthcare, and so some people might not be able to get to events. So that's another thing that's really nice about virtual events, whether you join them in the live like we are now, or whether people get to see them on demand. But it all comes back to that. You have to have a reason, you have to have a strategy, you have to know what you're doing with your events. And I think the event experience is key. If you do nail that, absolutely. That's not to say that virtual events fully replace face-to-face. They can often be complementary to as well, and I think we need to just remember that. And if there is another circumstance like a COVID, that suddenly operationally companies don't have to shut down, they have an alternative now. You can move things. I did the RSA Conference Europe, so I'm going to give away my age here. It was a long time ago, and it was actually when 9/11 happened. And this was so very much more before COVID, and we had to take a multi-day event with multiple speaker tracks, etc., and an exhibition, and put it all online, because obviously a lot of people were then very afraid to travel. So it's just, you find out what you're capable of when you're up against it. And I think event organizers do events, hats off to them, because it's a special kind of crazy to do it. But if you can do it right, the rewards are there for the business, and the rewards are there for the marketing team as well.
All right, well, I do want to move on to our talking points here, but really quickly, Soraya, you mentioned, you brought up the point that it's a good one. you need to have a plan. If I want to be successful and build competitive advantage by my skills with virtual and online events, what are some of the elements of a good plan that I should consider?
Well, I mean, I don't think it has to be too different from in-person events. I think if you attend an in-person event, you know, and it's just a PowerPoint and there's no engagement, I mean, people will not find that necessarily interesting as well, right? So it's all about how do you engage and interact people. It's just that through technology and through different platforms, like Marie mentioned, it can be more inclusive. You have more attendees, you can make a networking out of it more. So I think a good plan is just make sure kind of what are those sort of points of excitement that you want to bring that aligns with the strategy of the messaging you want to deliver, right? So I think having that together with kind of, like I think Sophie also mentioned and Carrie as well, like the new technology will support that and kind of could make it even more fun and easier to implement. So it doesn't have to be, you know, in person. I mean, the surprise element or a dance show, I'm obviously making a big gesture here, but that technology can help there. So if you have a plan, that's kind of to connect those two.
All right. Well, let's and ladies, please feel free to jump in anytime. If I'm passing by, you want to inject a comment, please feel free to do so. But let's move on to Carrie now for our first talking point, and that is the first talking point today is maximizing the impact and success of your internal and online events, really engaging your audience while elevating your brand. The question is, how can you transform your business critical events? Carrie, do you have an example of one virtual event that you felt was particularly successful? What did they do, and how can we do it too?
So we run a very large-scale client event every year, circa 300 people. It's a large investment from a marketing perspective. It takes a lot of resource and energy, and obviously COVID took that in a different direction for us. It forced us to go down a virtual path, which I can safely say was equally as challenging in terms of from an organization, content creation, agenda perspective. I don't think virtual events are easier. Those words have never crossed my lips, and I don't think they ever will. I think they are different. And I think to be successful in them, it's about working out what that engagement looks like for you as a business. What is your success metrics? And for us, it was about bringing content down into more bite-sized chunks. So not running sessions longer than 15 minutes, giving people plenty of time, more breaks. So if you're running a full-day conference in person, you'd give some tea and coffee breaks, you'd have a lunch break, but you'd expect people to be engaged for longer than in the virtual world, where we all know full well that it's very easy to become disengaged pretty quickly or distracted when you're sat at home and in front of your laptop. So bite-sized content, a really powerful agenda that pulls people and what makes them want to stay, and giving them the opportunity to walk away and come back. And one of the beauty of virtual is that you have reporting you don't have in the same way in an in-person world. So you can understand what you, from a success perspective, being able to measure is much, much easier, and then being able to adapt next time is simpler. But there's just as many challenges, I think, in pulling it all together and bringing it together as where there is with an in-person, but just different.
Now, Sophie, what about production elements that can make the event more impactful, audience members be more engaged? Are there some production elements that we should consider in our plans?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we sort of, it's a sliding scale in terms of budget, but, you know, we could produce something, you know, very similar to this in that everybody's online, you know, your speakers aren't all in the same room, everybody's dialing in, to something where, you know, a couple of weeks ago, we produced sort of a large scale event for, I think, 15,000 people dialed in for it, 40 were there in person, but we just built sort of bespoke studio within the headquarters of this particular business. So we used all of their furniture, we used all of their, you know, props, things like that. So the production elements weren't hugely expensive, but what we did was bring in cameras. We had, you sound engineers on site. So we created essentially a mini TV studio in the headquarters of this company. And it's a big, every couple of years, it's a huge event for them. And it just sort of ramped it up. What people weren't dialing in from home. We had a studio set up. All of our speakers were there, except for one in India who we did dial in actually. Everybody was around a table. We had sort of an area for a fireside chat, so 1+1s. We had an area for keynotes. We had an area for sort of 8 to 9 people to have a panel discussion. And we just kept it, as Carrie was saying, we didn't really have anything that lasted longer than 15, 20 minutes. We kept it bite-sized. We delivered all of those various pieces of content to people separately at the end, so that, for example, if somebody just wanted to rewatch the keynote, they could do very easily. They didn't have to sort of trawl through the whole 2-hour piece. But we also developed, a whole suite of graphics for them, so things like name straps, title cards, wipes. We really do treat all of our events a bit like a TV program, to be honest. People are watching things all of the time. Like they have to engage with it in a way. You have to create something creative essentially for people to engage with it. So we always think about music, we think about the branding, and things like sort of a simple registration process, an agenda up front so people know what's happening and at what time, in case they do want to dip in and out. An event that's over sort of 2 hours, you might find that people just can't commit to the whole thing. And then back to Marie's earlier point about travel, as I said, we had 15,000 people dial into that event. Now, historically, they would have hired out a huge arena for that kind of event, but they saved that 2-hour event. We saved, I think, 460 tons of carbon by doing the event the way that we did, which I think they worked out was enough to run 7 small supermarkets for a year. So it just goes to show there is more at play here than, what's a bit cheaper to do or what's a bit easier to do, although I agree with the other ladies, it's not easier at all. It's thinking creatively, and it's treating it, what we do is, like I said, we treat it like a TV program. So we have all of those elements that you would expect from, televised content.
I'd like to move to Marie for this next question, kind of coming in from Linda in our audience. Thank you, Linda, for your question. Linda's asking about hybrid events, and people are looking to get back together in person, but there's also a trend to do online events. So we really have this environment, as I mentioned in my intro, where 2023 is shaping up to be the year of the hybrid event. And Linda's asking, what are some specific challenges with this type of event? Marie, can you help us understand what some of those challenges are with a hybrid event and what we can do about those?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for your question, Linda. So it's basically double trouble, isn't it, when you've got a hybrid event, because you need to do the run of show and make sure everything with virtual is fine, but also you need to make sure that the people in the auditorium or the studio or wherever you're hosting it are equally fine. So it is that, now I sound like a crack record, but it is that preparation. It is just being very, very tight on everything and practicing. I think sometimes people who don't do these events don't understand the work that goes on. They just see what we're on now and they just kind of go, oh, it was either good or they weren't so impressed with it. But it's the pre-work that goes into that. So doing rehearsals. Rehearsals are absolutely key, even for those most senior and so-called experienced speakers and moderators and MCs, because everyone can have a bit of a duff day. So that is one of the key things. And I think Sophie talked earlier on about, having the right partners. And I think that applies whether that's partners in your speaker panel, whether that's partners with your tech. It is very much taking it as a team effort with everything that you do with events. So it is giving yourself plenty of time to run through and keep going back to that checklist. Carrie was talking there about making sure that you know what you're doing with it, and you know the resource and the KPIs and what you're trying to achieve for the business. Keep going back to that checklist, because you can get pulled into the tsunami of arranging an event, and before you know it, you're not looking back to your checklist, you're listening because somebody wants this over here, somebody wants that over there. Just give yourself plenty of time, make sure you have a cracking run of show, and also an excellent team around you who are all pulling in the same direction as you.
So
I think also, just to add
ahead.
to that, just because it's super relevant, is I think there's a risk sometimes that an event, a hybrid event, can feel like an event that's taking place in person, which you happen to be recording for some people at home that couldn't make it. And I think it's really important to make sure that that isn't the dynamic you're creating, that you're actually creating an event which is tailored just as much to those who weren't able to join in person as it is to those who are in the room. And whether that's, you know, for example, if you have a host or a presenter delivering some of those lines to the camera or to the recording device, as opposed to just to the people in the room, to make sure that you're including them in that way, and potentially even thinking about running some creative and some content specifically for the people at home, and then separately, to not suggesting you start to run 2 events at the same time, because that's madness, but you know, a VT here or a breakout room there online, for example. Just always thinking about, yes, this is very interesting for people here, but are the people at home feeling it? Because what we don't want them to do is feel like they're sort of just joining and they're not part of it, they're just watching it from afar.
Sophie, I was going to say, spot on, the kind of bringing in the people who can feel left out. So that's where I love things like live polls and tickers running across the bottom, and so like Linda's just asked and making that audience feel like they are included and their views, opinions, questions, observations are being noted by the people on the floor.
Absolutely. Indeed. Do you envision a time when the online audience may indeed be, I don't mean to say more important or a higher priority, but the focus is every bit as much on the online experience? I really like the suggestion that speakers are looking into the camera, perhaps, which is something you wouldn't necessarily be thinking about for just a live event. But do you believe that there'll be a day not too shortly soon where the focus is on that online experience every bit as much, if not more, than the in-person experience?
Kevin, that's one of the reasons BlueJeans is a little unique thing to us. We actually have it so you can promote somebody who is in the audience to come on and appear, like Carrie, Sophie, Soraya, and you. And I think that's quite nice to make that possible. But now, shush.
All right, very good. All right, well, let's move on to our next talking point. That is the idea of avoiding virtual meeting fatigue. And what are some tips and tools for improving participation and creativity? Soraya, what are your experiences with this whole issue of online meeting fatigue, and what can we do about it?
Well, I think we touched upon it a little bit with kind of, I think everybody mentioned that you do sort of bits, like you don't have an hour-long presentation, you do it like 50 minutes, 20 minutes, so people have opportunity to kind of, the attention span doesn't go away. I think it was Carrie that mentioned is like you do give space in agenda for people to go away from the computer and come back. I think that's very important, so they have that sort of a break as well to not have the fatigue. I think it's very important. And then I think in terms of just talking about, again, to keep it interesting, personally, I think one of the best is like surprise pop-up, whether it's a speaker or an event or an activity. That usually gets everybody excited. So whether that is, if we have a new famous brand ambassador, suddenly that person joins the Zoom, or if it's a different aspect of people can engage or put an opinion or something, right? I think that the kind of element of surprise always captures it. So I think that's also something like you suddenly wake up and it's not so much fatigue in that. But I also believe in a very engaging agenda from start. I think it was one of the ladies who mentioned it. I think it's very important to have an engaging agenda to make people say like, okay, I'm really going to be focused. I don't miss this.
Carrie, what about your experience? I know many, just our work environment, many C-suites are holding virtual-only strategy sessions at the C-suite. Of course, many workers now, most workers today are using technology to interact in teams and do meetings on our day-to-day, in our day-to-day business. It's not necessarily always a big event. Carrie, what is your experience for combating meeting fatigue and in boosting engagement by team members working online together?
I think it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. So if you're talking about from an internal perspective and you're talking about our SLT meetings, for example, is giving people the option to be on and off camera, because I think what we don't realize is camera can really drive fatigue, and you don't realize it until you come off camera and go, oh
Yeah.
I've done an hour of staring like this, because it's mildly unnatural for you as a human to do that. So it's being able to give people the choice in how they interact in those online environments. It's giving people the opportunity to access chats and Q&As rather than having necessarily the pressure on them to be able to come off mute and give a voice and have an opinion. And I think that goes across both internal and external event types. It's about choice. It's about giving people accessibility, that what works for them. Ultimately, I think when I think about externally, it's about getting the mix right for your customer base, for your target audience. And what maybe virtual events are great for some things, but in-person work for others. So it's, what's your marketing strategy? What events form part of that for us? You know, I sit across everything marketing. I don't just sit across events. So it's thinking about how our event strategy plays into our overall marketing strategy, that plays into our business strategy, and what we're trying to achieve.
Sophie, what are your thoughts about avatars? Now, I've been reading about AI generated avatars, so I don't have to be on camera. I can have my avatar on camera. Do you feel that that's part of the future of our online space?
Yeah, I mean, I have to be honest, I don't know much about that, but that does sound very good. And I think Carrie is completely, yeah, she's bang on. I mean, I think even if you're just watching something and you're not speaking or having to participate, I do still completely agree. It can just make you feel exhausted just watching something, staring at your screen, sitting in the same position. So having an option where you don't have to have your camera on, and really, especially when there's, you know, hundreds, potentially thousands of people, I don't think anybody needs to have their camera on, really. So I think that is fine. I don't know much about the AI avatar side of things yet, although I am now going to look into it because it does.
I am an AI avatar. I'm not really here.
You're not there. I think, you know, you already have people's buy-in. They've signed up to the event. They're interested. I mean, unless it's a company-wide town hall and everyone kind of has to go. Other than that, people have signed up. They've registered. They want to be there. So you're already half of the way there. So really, what you've captured their attention. They're interested in the topic. So now it's kind of your responsibility to make sure you have a variety of speakers, potentially speakers that are coming at things from a bit of a different angle and might challenge each other. They might say, someone might say one thing and the other say, well, actually, we do it this way. And, I'm not saying you want conflict, but it's interesting to have people coming at it from different points of view. And I think, being able to sort of pause from listening to people speaking and maybe go to a pre-recorded VT or, a couple of minutes long, just something different to what people are seeing, especially in a 1 or 2 hour program, can really help as well.
This question coming in from Vincent. Thank you, Vincent, for your question today. What are the best KPIs to adopt when measuring audience engagement? Number of views and participating, polling and Q&A perhaps. Marie, what are your thoughts on the best KPIs and measurements to use?
So I think Carrie said it best, because she was sort of saying making sure that your strategy for marketing aligns to your strategy for the business is really key. With Blue Jeans, obviously we've got the platform, so we're all about the data and analytics. And I think Carrie, you said about the wealth of reporting that we have nowadays. So we look at things like their engagement on their duration of this screen being up on there, the amount of engagement they do, whether they're asking Q&A, whether they're responding to the polls, those kind of things. But I think it's also not just looking about the numbers that are on live. I think the beauty of virtual events is that on-demand piece. So not just going, right, today's event's out the way and we got X number, but then looking in and checking on that a month later, 3 months later, 6 months later. But also the feedback. Did the speakers feel like it was a good use of the time? Did the business feel proud to have their brand associated with that? Did you have follow-up with the attendees? Hopefully you send out some kind of feedback afterwards, or something like an action, a call to action, them to follow up on. I think it's hard to just to go one size fits all in terms of the KPIs, but it's understanding, to Carrie's point, what's your business strategy, what's marketing trying to do to support that, and then track back and figure it out. And that will also then help you direct your marketing events and your target personas and your target content and your messages that you want to land. But I think
All right.
the key thing is about also just setting the scene from the start. I think if you tell people, to Soraya's point, that you're going to be sitting there for an hour-long presentation on PowerPoint, you've lost them. If you say, we're going to be doing some polls during this, we want to get your opinion because we've got a new product launch coming up, we want to show you a video, to Sophie's point, changing it up, so all of a sudden it wasn't just people talking, there's a funky audio soundtrack going over. All of that just kind of needs to go in to give you the best chance of success.
For me,
All
it's
right.
that survey as well, and being able to get that feedback loop from the audience, because although we've got the ability to capture a ton more data from online events, more than we do maybe in the in-person environment, that survey piece is still really important for that feedback loop on the quality of the content, because ultimately your agenda and your content is going to be aligned with what your objectives are for the event. So that feedback loop for me, that continuous learning and improvement piece, really important.
We have been speaking today with Soraya Hazlitt, Carrie Heath, Marie Thornton, and Sophie Cordia. We've been talking about virtual and online events and how to make the most of them and really build them as a acumen or a skill set that we can use to create competitive advantage. And ladies, in the time that we have left, just a few minutes left, I was hoping that you might provide us with one quick action item that we can use to take advantage of your ideas and advice today. Soraya, do you have an action item for us today?
Well, I think I still stand with it. I think one of the big actions to create something successful is really make sure you have your objectives clear. So what is the end goal of your event? And kind of it's a starting point, I think, for that to kind of plan it correctly ahead and make it engaging. So I think we all said it, but make sure it aligns with the overall strategy. So I think that's my takeaway. Just make sure that the objectives are very clear with your event.
And Carrie, do you have an action item for us today?
I mean, for me, it's thinking about your content. What's your agenda driving? What outcomes do you want from the audience? What do you want them to do with that content and with that information that you provide them, and being able to put it in a digestible format, so bite-sized content.
Thank you. And Sophie, how about an action item for us?
Yeah, I would just say, just be ambitious and be creative. I think it's really easy to stick with what you know with these online or hybrid events and just kind of rerun the same sort of content or format that you're running all the time. And actually, just a few small tweaks or a few small additions to what you're already doing can just make all the difference, especially with an hour-long or 2-hour-long event. Just, get creative with it and just be ambitious, I would say.
Don't be afraid. Yeah. And finally, Marie, what is your action item for us today?
My thing is, we went to Gartner Barcelona last November and we did a little survey while we were there, a bit of primary research, and we found out that over 30% of organisations attending were spending over £250,000 a year on hosting hybrid and virtual events. As a marketeer, seeing my budget go to simple things like just trying to do a poll or a ticker or Q&A and having them separate to chat, I would rather save my money for the VIP big events like Sophie was talking at 15,000 and bring in the full event agency there, but still have, do my own in-house stuff like your financial updates, your analyst briefings, your product launching, your large-scale training, do them myself with my team and still make them look slick and professional. That's my kind of thing. And then I've got my more marketing budget to do the stuff which I'm annually performance reviewed on, I think probably is my thing. So use your money wisely. We're all under the cosh at the moment for that.
Well, thank you, ladies. That is Soraya Hazlitt, Carrie Heath, Marie Thornton, and Sophie Cordia. Thank you so much, ladies, for being with us today. What a great panel. Your perspectives and advice were spot on. And thank you so much to everyone who attended today. Join us again next time on June 13th at 1600 British Standard Time, British Summer Time, when we will talk with another great panel of experts about how to avoid the tech talent shortage derailing your digital transformation. It should be another great discussion. And if you'd like to find me, you can do so at LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect there and check me out. I'm Kevin Crane, and you can check out my weekly audio podcast, the Digital Transformation Podcast. Well, all right, that'll do it for this episode of Digital Transformation Talk. Until next week, or until next time, I'm Kevin Crane. Thanks for watching.